Welcome. I don't know how this is going to turn out. We'll see how that looks. This is kind of going to be a little bit different than what I'm usually doing these past couple of days. Mostly what I've been doing is getting articles, and I might respond to some videos and stuff eventually. We'll see how that goes in future. Because I want to make this channel something kind of different than what you typically see. Like, usually what you see with these kinds of political channels is they're like, a lot of times it's like, oh, you're bad, and you're mean, and you're evil, and all this stuff. Like, there's a lot of name calling and shouting and like these kind of things. And there's a lot of curation of content where, like, what I've noticed is that this is something that I might do a deeper episode on this, or on my podcast, which I have a podcast called The Political Specifist, and also have another podcast as well, but called just The Specifist, if you're interested. But what I mean by this is, like, they will make a video or whatever, and they won't really show you their process. They won't really show you what they're researching, what they're looking up, and show it to you like in real time when they're doing it. And so what I want to do is literally show this to you when we're literally talking articles and stuff, to kind of help you to get a deeper kind of metric of what's happening here with all this kind of information. So, but today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about racism. What is racism really? If we boil it down to its actual points in understanding what it really is. Because people love using this word. And it's not really about racism anymore. It's about using it to get people fired, to get people canceled. Basically just used to against people that you don't like. That's really what it is anymore. Any kind of phrase like this anymore is used like this: racist, sexist, transphobe, homophobe, in some cases, but especially racist and sexist. And it's so overused that I don't think it has the same meaning as it used to have when people used to use this word 10 or 20 years ago. And so I want to explain to you what is really going on with racism, what really racism really is, and what it really means, and why this is important to understand. Because this is very important to understand for various reasons. One of the big ones being that if we can understand it, we can deal with it from that level. And there are cases of this happening where people literally deal with it from the level that we're at the level that these racists are at. It's very easy, very simple to do. But more difficult than just calling them racist and doing nothing else about it, I suppose. So there is that. Anyways, what is racism really? I'm not going to be one of those people who tell you that racism doesn't exist anymore because we're in the 2000s and racism is not a thing. People think racism is bad if we ask everybody. Yeah, that's sort of true, but that's not completely what is happening here. So, and it doesn't really explain much anyways. So I want to go into this in a deeper way here with you, because that's what I attempt to do in these episodes. I attempt to try and explain these things in better ways than before. So, what is racism really? The answer is it's not really about race, because race doesn't exist scientifically. It's about culture. Typically, from what I've become aware of, and I've seen a lot of examples of this, and a lot of people talk about this, there's a lot of areas that have very, very much the same culture. You have an area that has mostly like Asian people. You have an area that has mostly white people. You have an area that has mostly black people. Whatever it is, maybe there's a completely different Jewish community, completely different like Chinese community, whatever. And so, when we're talking racism, what we're really talking about is culturalism. In particular, what I would like to call a neighborhood monoculture. Monoculture is basically like a culture, just one homogenous culture in this one area, right? Not saying that all neighborhoods are like this, or that there won't be some outliers within this neighborhood or this area especially. But typically speaking, that's where you will find the most of this problem that we're talking about. Monoculture. It's traditionally why people see more racism in more rural areas, because there's less of particular races in those areas. Less black people, less whatever, less people of color in general, for various reasons, which have probably a lot to do with the ways in which it's been set up. It's really weird. Like you can go to places where there's a hodgepodge of different cultures and people of color and things like this, and you won't really find anybody there that's like truly racist at all. Anything that you find at all there is really weird and unique, and to me would be kind of like it would be very unusual for various reasons, because like I said, you are seeing this everywhere, and you might even be interacting with this. You might be seeing it, and you might be like distancing yourself from it within your own mind and stuff, which could also cause this as well. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen in these more multicultural areas, but it is probably going to be less likely to happen for various reasons. And we can argue about how it's bad or good, that this is a thing, that monoculture exists in certain areas, but it's not really about that for me. It's about like what is the result of this. Bad or good doesn't really equate at all, because it doesn't really make anything very specific. I could say that like rainy weather is bad, but that doesn't really explain why rainy weather happens. I might not like rainy weather, but it doesn't explain what rainy weather is and what it comes from, right? Things like this. And so I'm trying to be specific with all this stuff. And so that's why I try not to use words like bad or good, because it's not about that for me. It's about understanding what these different things are. Anyways, and so when you're looking at these different races, whatever they are, hold on a second.
Speech on. Screen locked.
Oh, there it goes. You sort of like get this like distorted view, like because you're in a monoculture, so you might get a distorted view because you see like rap culture or something, and so you might get a sort of view of certain people of color or whatever. For instance, to give you like a very generalized example of how this can kind of work. Not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's a good way of seeing things, but that's kind of how the mind can kind of work in a lot of these areas. And so when we're talking about these different topics, it's always important to get a clear understanding of why this is happening. What is really going on here? There's an interesting thing that I've always read about and I've learned about, called the Dunbar number, right? This number is like the max amount of people that you can realistically know without overwhelming all these kinds of different things. And it won't be even to a large degree, like it's not complete at this number. And so if you aren't necessarily acquainted with other cultures within this Dunbar number, you can be pretty close to a monoculture. You're not really familiar with these different groups and cultures. That's one of the reasons why you'll see people from different backgrounds and cultures, which you could call races as well, say that like this race looks the same like as everybody else in this race. Like white people look all the same, or Asian people look the same. This is why, because the brain is programmed to familiarize itself with the people that it knows. If it doesn't know an Asian group or culture, it doesn't really need to know what those faces look like as much in that way. This is a very scientific brain-based understanding. This is why it's important, because people will say this is a bad thing, that people should not have this, but this is not about should or shouldn't. Honestly, it would be amazing to me if we could just get rid of all these kinds of words with this kind of stuff, because it's not about that at all. But that's never going to happen anyways. But it is a fond wish of mine at this point, because it just muddies the waters on these kinds of issues that we're talking about. So anyways, that's racism in a nutshell. And that creates racism in a nutshell. Stereotypes, because, like I said, you're not familiar with people in this culture and things like this. This is why I'm really a fan of like people like Daryl Davis. If you don't know who this is, basically what he did was he was, I think it was like in the 80s or something, but I'm not absolutely certain. Maybe in the 90s. He basically talked with a lot of Klan members at the time, and he basically was just kind of acting normal with them, right? And you can tell when he speaks that he's very like educated, he's articulate and all these things. And so it's not like you're dealing with somebody like who is unaware of these kinds of different things. You can clearly see that he's aware of these different issues in different ways, and so when he is speaking to these types of people, they see that their stereotype that they have in their minds about the culture that he would be traditionally roped into by these types of racist people, when they see that this is not how he is, they basically like left the Klan. They stopped believing in the same things the Klan members do, and they basically left, right? And this is what it's all about. It's about understanding different cultures in this way. You could almost make the argument, I don't know if this is absolutely accurate, but there are definitely some interesting correlations that I found for this, but you could almost make the argument that those who are against like these different cultures don't know the middle in different ways. Now, I'm not saying that every culture is equally good and equal to the same thing, because that's obviously not true. There are cultures that have horrible practices and all these different things. But to say that one particular culture or race is equally inferior and all this other stuff can be disproven in different ways. So, anyway, enjoy this episode, and I will talk to you on the next one.